Latitude, I'm Maruf Raza. Senior Indian diplomat Devyani Khobragade's arrest and ill treatment by the US federal agents has resulted in a full-scale diplomatic row between New Delhi and Washington. With India staring back, the jury is still out on how soon Devyani's trauma would end. And later in the show, the execution of Abdul Qadir Mullah has created a great divide in Bangladesh, and the ensuing violence has already claimed many lives. In the worst cases of rioting and violence in recent memory in that country, and it could in turn jeopardize the general elections scheduled for early January next year. To discuss the present diplomatic row with the US, we will be joined by former Foreign Minister of India, Mr. Yashwan Sinha. And to understand the present political dynamics in Bangladesh and its importance to the subcontinent, we'll be joined by Mr. Humayun Kabir, who has earlier been the Deputy High Commissioner in India and then Bangladesh's ambassador to the US. In an uncharacteristic hardening of stance, India has stared back at the United States, and the usually silent Dr. Manmohan Singh has called the treatment meted out to the Indian diplomat Devyani Khobragade as deplorable. And in what is considered to be one of the strictest action against any country, the government of India has decided to limit the benefits enjoyed by the US diplomats in India. The question is, how far will this incident impact on Indo-US relations?
Devyani Khobragade, Deputy Consul General in New York, may have been expecting the worst. After all, her maid Sangeeta Richard had vanished from her residence 6 months ago, and the Americans in Delhi, New York and Washington have either been indifferent or even hostile. But what happened to her on 18th of December was completely unprecedented. She was handcuffed outside her daughter's school, taken to the police station, swabbed, asked for a urine sample to check for drugs and put behind bars, even though she's a diplomat covered under the Vienna Convention, leaving India completely outraged. Devyani has been charged with visa fraud and not paying her former maid Sangeeta the minimum wage prescribed in US law.
We feel a very extreme level of distress in terms of a human element that's involved. The person of the officer being subjected to that form of indignity is for us completely unacceptable.
In the meanwhile, lots of contradictions that continue to expose the US, with the US State Department initially making this a Department of Justice issue and later admitting that Secretary of State John Kerry was in the loop.
The Secretary understands very deeply the importance of enforcing our laws and protecting victims, and like all officials in positions of responsibility inside the U.S. government, expects that laws will be followed by everyone here in our country. It's also particularly important to Secretary Kerry that foreign diplomats serving in the United States are accorded respect and dignity, just as we expect our own diplomats should receive overseas as well.
The charges made by U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara only worsened matters and were violently rebutted by the External Affairs Ministry.
When the legal process in another friendly and democratic country is interfered with in this manner, it not only amounts to interference, but also raises the serious concern of calling into question the very legal system of that country. It is our considered view that this statement is one more attempt at a post facto rationalization for an action that should never have taken place in the first instance.
The US stand has been completely exposed, even as it goes into complete damage control mode. No attempts have been made to drop charges against Khobragade. The first conversation between US Undersecretary Wendy Sherman and Foreign Secretary Sujata Singh on Thursday night remained inconclusive. New Delhi cancelled airport passes and limited many benefits enjoyed by US diplomats. India and the United States were in the process of forming a close strategic partnership, but this issue seems to have taken the two countries apart by many years, and the Obama administration has many questions to answer. The US administration's motive continues to remain unclear. Devyani was arrested and ill-treated despite being an Indian diplomat fulfilling her duties in the US, even as Sangeeta Richard and her family have been extended every possible benefit. lots of questions, very little answers from the United States.
Well, it's quite clear that unless Washington moves quickly to undo the damage this incident has done to bilateral ties, several years of diplomatic effort could be undone. And to answer questions on the present diplomatic crisis, we are now joined by Mr. Yashwan Sinha, the former Foreign Minister of India. Mr. Sinha, my first question. Evidence has continued to surface that shows that the arrest and the unacceptable treatment of Devyani Khobragade, an Indian diplomat in the US, was clearly orchestrated by local authorities with an agenda to embarrass and anger India. Do you agree?
Yes, I entirely agree with you, especially in view of the revelation that the husband of the maid, along with the two children, were evacuated by the US from India. This is unprecedented that an Indian national should be evacuated for ostensibly safety reasons to the US by the American embassy in New Delhi.
Well, this isn't the first case of an Indian diplomat taking domestic help abroad or to the US. And it is well-known fact that visas in the past were given repeatedly to maids and household helps in a similar manner as was organized and obtained by Devyani Khobragade, perhaps as part of an unwritten diplomatic arrangement between India and the US and many other Western countries. Then why this sudden change in America's attitude?
It's most baffling, Maruf. To tell you the truth, it's most baffling. And, especially in view of the fact that the Foreign Secretary of India was in the US at that point of time. The Joint Secretary dealing with America was in the US at that point of time. And according to the Vienna Convention, whatever action they wanted to take, they should have first informed the Indian government through the Indian embassy in Washington. No such a step was taken. So that confirms the first suggestion that you made, that it's a conspiracy.
It is felt that America's officials often follow one set of rules for their own citizens and another for the rest of the world. Take the case of Raymond Davis and his extradition from Pakistan, despite murdering Pakistanis in Lahore and then being given a diplomatic status for immunity, or the salaries that American diplomats allegedly pay to their embassy staff in India, as well as to the household helps, which is perhaps below the prescribed norms in the US. What are your views?
The US has not often, always followed double standards. And, somewhere at the back of the mind is the feeling that they are a superpower and they can get away with anything. And they treat other countries, especially third world countries, as inferior countries. They can take them for a ride. So you are quite right in saying, even why only Davis, even in India, I am quite sure that there are people who have been given diplomatic status without deserving it, and that's something which needs to be looked into.
America and India were apparently looking at long-term strategic partnership, but this dip in diplomatic ties is probably going to do more harm to bilateral relations than anything has done since the Pokhran nuclear tests. Can the situation now be quickly reversed?
America has clearly proved that it is not a strategic partner of India in the manner in which they have treated our diplomat. And the very fact that they are now refusing to take back the case, they are not prepared to apologize, will show a hardening in the US position. And this is now not how a strategic partner should behave. So there is obviously a change as far as India is concerned in the US thinking towards India. And I think we have to factor this in and then look at our relationship with the US in future. And the most important point that I like to make to you, Maruf, is this, that we are a great nation, a large nation, and India must stand up to the US and not refuse to be treated as a second-class world citizen.
While it is unlikely that the Obama administration will apologize for the mess that has been created by local authorities in the US, But the onus is clearly on them to put a quick and graceful end to this saga. Coming up next on Latitude, as the authorities in Bangladesh confront large-scale violence, the big question is, could this stall the forthcoming elections in Bangladesh? Welcome back. The execution of Abdul Qadir Mullah on charges of war crimes has divided India's eastern neighbor Bangladesh, with radical groups in the country having gone on the rampage as general elections approach the country, which is now torn between an ideological divide more than pure political rivalry between two of the major leading parties just before an election.
He was known as the Butcher of Mirpur, who committed brutal rapes and murders during the 1971 Bangladesh War, vehemently opposed to the independence movement of East Pakistan. But on the 12th of December this month, when Abdul Mullah was hanged for the unthinkable atrocities he had committed by Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's War Crimes Tribunal, Bangladesh witnessed a spate of violence, with Mullah's Jamaat-e-Islami party coming together with the principal opposition in the state to vow revenge against the government. The opposition even going to the extent of boycotting the upcoming 2014 general elections in Bangladesh in the wake of Mullah's hanging, also demanding that Sheikh Hasina step down to give way to an independent caretaker government to conduct elections impartially. But it's a system which Sheikh Hasina had changed in 2001.
I think that basically every effort should continue to persuade BNP to take part in the elections. But I think nonetheless, despite the fact that BNP, if they continue the boycott, and especially because they appear to be continuing the boycott because they want to cast doubts on the credibility of the electoral process, I think the election process will just have to go on. Because otherwise, democracy in Bangladesh will be deeply affected.
The bitter political rivalry in Dhaka between the pro-India Awami League, led by Sheikh Hasina, and the pro-Jamaat Bangladesh Nationalist Party, led by Khaleda Zia, has long undermined political stability in Bangladesh and limited realization of its vast economic potential. The divide further widening with the approaching general elections. But as far as India is concerned, the return of Sheikh Hasina could only be beneficial, considering her determined fight against extremism in recent years, due to which India's eastern frontier has been relatively calm. While the ruling Awami League is perceived to be a moderate political force, the BNP is seen as pitching for a pan-Islamic identity for the nation. But many in New Delhi fear that the return of Islamist groups backed by Pakistan's ISI in Bangladesh could threaten the vulnerable eastern borders of India. But Delhi has still maintained a non-partisan approach towards Dhaka, and by encouraging the BNP to participate in the elections.
We believe in not interfering basically in the affairs of our neighbors or any other country, just as we would react very strongly if somebody tries to interfere in our domestic affairs. So by and large, we take the route of that it is for the people of Bangladesh to decide, and it is for the parties and the leaders of Bangladesh to decide how they wish to play their politics, how they wish to conduct themselves, or how they wish to have elections, etc.
Meanwhile, with terrorists like Hafiz Saeed trying their level best to accuse India of siding with the Sheikh Hasina government in eliminating Pakistan supporters like Abdul Mullah, the big question is, what are India's options in this battle for Bangladesh, which is perhaps more ideological than electoral?
Although New Delhi would perhaps prefer the return of the Awami League, India has maintained a non-partisan stand in the events in Bangladesh, even as Western countries have chosen to support the right-leaning Khaleda Zia's BNP. And to discuss the changing political and domestic scenario in Bangladesh, we have with us Mr. Humayun Kabir, who was formerly a Deputy High Commissioner in India and later Bangladesh's ambassador to the United States. Mr. Kabir, my first question. The current turmoil in Bangladesh is perhaps the worst political crisis faced by the country in recent years. Where do you see the situation growing from here?
Thank you very much. Yes, you are right that we are passing through a phase of uncertainty and a kind of political crisis. The political crisis that Bangladesh has seen for the last one or 2 years remains unresolved. So that means that the prospect of instability continuing remains high. And at the same time, the question of legitimacy of governance will remain as vibrant as ever, because the people, the government that will come based on this election, that is that election for the 10th parliament, will remain weak, in the sense that the people have not participated to the desired level, and there has not been participation of the opposition parties. So in that case, the question of representation or delegation of authority to the new government by the people remains under a big question. The social turmoil that we are facing in the context of the ongoing political upheaval in the country, that is likely to have more vibration even after the election is over. So that may affect our social stability in the medium and long term.
Well, there is a view that the supporters of the hardline Jamaat and the BNP are clearly anti-Indian on many key issues, from economic partnership to boundary and water-related arrangements. And if this perception is true, then what is the basis of the stance of these groups?
Well, yeah, there is an impression that BNP Jamaat alliance is against India. That's an impression. But I think that if we look at the issue from a slightly larger context or from longer time horizon, then we might get a different picture. If somebody says that BNP is anti-Indian or Awami League is pro-Indian, I think that's not a really fair assessment. What is important is that both the parties, this is my personal view, is that both Awami League and BNP, they understand what is Bangladesh's interest, and they will make their judgment, or they will continue their relationship with India based on those issues. Just to give you another picture, Bangladesh and India trade relationship is growing. Economic relationship is expanding. There is no reason to believe that if even BNP comes to power, they will interrupt or disrupt that kind of relationship, because whatever ideological orientation they may have, this is the interest of the people.
Well, in the event of the Begum Zia-led BNP coming to power, Pakistan's anti-India agenda could get a free run in Bangladesh's soil, since the Pakistan Army, the ISI and Hafiz Saeed have always supported the convicted and now hanged Abdul Qadir Mullah and the hardline Jamaat members. What then are India's options?
Well, there are two things here. Why are you presuming that if there is change in the government, Pakistan will come back? Bangladesh fought against Pakistan during our liberation war, and I think we stood for our dignity, and we still stand for our dignity, and I believe that we'll continue to stand for our dignity. And what is important, we in Bangladesh, as I said earlier, that the political parties are really, they will have to look into the interest of the people of Bangladesh. And during the last few years, the ground reality has changed a lot, has transformed. For example, Bangladesh and India are much more in closer relationship on security matters, on economic matters, on connectivity issues. So why you should not also look at the issue or issues from a positive perspective, in the sense that things would be slightly different, and not different in a negative sense. I am saying it from a positive perspective. It would be better for India and Bangladesh, or for the larger interest of India and Bangladesh, is for India to engage with all the actors in Bangladesh. And then I think if we can create a sense of mutuality of interest, then it would be much easier for India and Bangladesh to work regardless of who comes in power.
Well, if the elections go through as scheduled, by mid-next year, both Delhi and Dhaka would have new governments, and this could present both new opportunities and challenges for the two countries. This is all in this week's episode of Latitude. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, thank you and goodbye.